there's been a lot of backtracking and over-explaining about how the COVID relief bill doesn't actually contain spending for the military and $500 million in aid to Israel, but those allocations are part of a separate spending bill that the COVID relief bill is a part of. But in my opinion, it doesn't really make any difference which piece of legislation those expenditures are noted in because it was all passed together as a package. And that suggests to me that the COVID relief bill wouldn't have been approved had the other spending bills not been. That sounds oddly to me like that $600 was held hostage for all that other money that the government wanted, but may not have gotten if it wasn't attached to coronavirus relief, our relief. The scant little bit of it that we're getting wasn't a straightforward decision to just help the people through this pandemic, but it was part of a quid pro quo. I'll vote for that only if you'll let me have this kind of deal that ought to incense everyone in this country. But it doesn't, because watching CNN and MSNBC and seeing that there was no mention of any of the extraneous expenditures for the military and foreign aid that were tied to the passage of the COVID relief bill, but seeing coverage of these ridiculous line items for millions for integrity and horse racing and criminalizing unauthorized streaming, whatever that means, seeing that reported on Fox News instead was a jarring example of why so many people are so incredibly docile in the face of yet another example of appalling disrespect of us by this government. Now, of course, Fox News didn't dare bring up the $500 million for aid to Israel that includes more money for more missiles for them and the $33 million to continue to overthrow the democratically elected government in Venezuela. So even as conservative Fox viewers are accurately questioning the spending priorities of the government over providing aid to its people, they're also never going to get honest reporting on how much of our money this government spends on destroying other people's democratically elected governments around the world. But it's hard not to see very clearly watching the two networks and what they tell the truth about and what they don't talk about at all. It's hard not to see very clearly how Americans are so woefully misinformed on both sides of the political spectrum. And this, of course, is by design because nobody who isn't a politician or a lobbyist is celebrating this legislation. But the way it's being reported makes it sound like it's some great moral achievement. The New York Times has run an article chronicling what it tries to paint as brave negotiations that took place in the living room of Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski's house, where legislators sat socially distanced and eating Tuscan takeout with the windows open to allow air to circulate, the cold air, making it sound as if they were hunkered down in some post-apocalyptic ice age bunker, hammering out a plan to save humanity. Only the plan they hammered out wasn't actually to save anyone, but it just created a stopgap until March. And that was literally what Democratic Senator Richard Durbin said when he told the room full of legislators, quote, "Forget about a sweeping stimulus initiative. What we need here is a limited emergency plan to get the country through March," end quote. Mitt Romney is reported to have said that's what really opened up the eyes of all of us. They thought this was a great thing, y'all. Opened up their eyes to what exactly? That Democrats were prepared to throw us crumbs, and that was an eye-opening surprise to the Republicans, that they didn't have to force them to do it? Shocking. None of us thought in good conscience that we could go home for Christmas with all these people thrown out of their apartments, closing their businesses, getting into food lines. That's what Democratic Senator Mark Warner said. It would be the ultimate Scrooge-like activity. But people have already been thrown out of their apartments and homes. Businesses have already been closed. Food lines have already grown miles long in many cities. This has already happened. And these people are seeming to act as if this $600 and 2.5 months of federal unemployment, that's half of what was approved before, is going to ease the horror of what has already happened or stop the rest of what is to come. Nancy Pelosi reportedly told Steve Mnuchin on a phone call back in September that at some point she spent a sleepless night watching the movie The Princess Bride, comparing negotiations as mostly dead, like the character in the movie who was tortured nearly to death. Mitch McConnell told his Republican colleagues that their stalemate against the Democrats caused the Democrats to get off their $2 trillion dime. And that was reason to be hopeful. Because of that, he agreed to drop their demand for liability protection for businesses if the Democrats would not push for money for state and local governments. Meanwhile, Republican Senator Toomey claimed victory for sweeping out $429 billion in unused CARES Act funds that was allocated for the Federal Reserve lending programs and for repurposing that money, and for the shutting down of 4 lending facilities for the Fed and forbidding the reopening of those facilities and banning future iterations of the program in the future. Toomey said that he was very pleased with that, but I'm not, and you shouldn't be either, because I want to know why, if there was any unused money from the original CARES Act, why that money wasn't repurposed into a bigger and more regular checks for you and me. Did you know there was money left over from the first relief bill? I didn't until now. So how are these people claiming that they have no money for more relief for you and me? The only people celebrating this bill are the people who don't know what it's been like to struggle under the conditions that they, all of them, the Republicans and the Democrats, have made worse in this pandemic. But they are happy that they got all of their wish list just in time for the holidays to be happy for them. You and I, somebody needs to hold our place in that food line. Follow Lukman Nation on patreon.com/LukmanNation for lots of great content.